So I'm going to note some current campus policies that are analogous to these old anti-porn laws because they share the following features. They violate free speech and other fundamental rights. They're advocated for the sake of advancing women's rights, but in fact, they undermine rights for women and men alike. But before I say more about these specific current campus issues, I want to make a couple general comments. First, I want to underscore something I said a moment ago. The policies I'm critiquing adversely affect both women and men. It's important to recognize that all of us, whatever our gender, are adversely affected by any policies that are based on gender stereotypes. That's certainly true for the current problematic campus policies. They reflect insulting stereotypes that deny autonomy and agency to men and women alike. Women are viewed as helpless, passive victims who can't protect ourselves, and men are viewed as aggressive predators who can't control their violent impulses. And these are precisely the same problem with the anti-pornography laws that I argued against in defending pornography. In fact, the ACLU went to court decades ago to challenge those anti-pornography laws, and our Women's Rights Project, founded by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think you've heard of her, the argument was that these laws not only violated First Amendment free speech rights, but they also violated 14th Amendment equal protection rights. So I'm going to quote from a brief that the ACLU filed more than 30 years ago, which is also equally apt today as an indictment of too many current campus regulations. Quote, "A law that equates women with children and men with satyrs is hardly a step toward gender equality," quote unquote. There's yet another problem with the current campus exaltation of safety, and it's a distorted concept of safety, very different from the dictionary definition, which is protection from physical violence. To the contrary, the current clamor for campus safety seeks protection from what? From ideas that make one uncomfortable. In other words, ideas that we disagree with. I hope you all saw the spot-on Onion satire of this concept last week. Here's the headline: "Parents dedicate new college safe space in honor of daughter who felt weird in class once." And the subheading: "The calming new idea-free zone will be open around the clock to comfort students who have read or heard opinions that are at odds with their pre-existing worldview." Now, alas, that satiric safe space is not too far from what we've been seeing in reality. For instance, last fall, when a safe space was set up at Brown University for students who felt endangered by the mere fact that a debate was taking place on campus purely for those who chose to attend, right, all volunteers, and the topic of the debate was, shock, how should college handle sexual assault? Now, let me quote the New York Times article about Brown's real safe space. This is not a satire, this is reality. Quote, "The room was equipped with cookies, coloring books, bubbles, Play-Doh, calming music, pillows, blanket, and a video of frolicking puppies, as well as students and staff members trained to deal with trauma. Emma Hall, a junior who helped set up the room, at one point went to the debate, but after a while, she said, she had to return to the safe space, explaining, 'I was feeling bombarded by a lot of viewpoints that really go against my dearly and closely held beliefs,' close quote. And I have to underscore that it's not just a fringe position on campus to falsely equate unpopular ideas with physical violence. For example, I'm going to quote the news article in the Brown Daily Herald that described this safe space. Now, this was a news story, not an editorial. It announced the safe space in a way that just uncritically, reflexively accepted the false analogy of unpopular ideas to physical violence. So here's what the news story said, quote, "Students who may feel attacked by the viewpoints expressed at the forum." Did you hear that? Attacked by the viewpoints expressed at the forum can find a safe space at the same time. Well, ironically, this distorted concept of safety couldn't be more dangerous. To say that we should be protected from disagreeable ideas is the exact opposite of what the Supreme Court has hailed as the bedrock, the cornerstone of our free speech system, which is itself the cornerstone of all our freedoms, namely that speech can never be suppressed merely because anyone, even the vast majority of our community, considers the ideas to be evil or offensive. Now, to be sure, even Justice Brandeis recognized that speech may be suppressed if, but only if, it poses an imminent danger of concrete injury, such as the classic example, intentional incitement of imminent violence. However, short of such an extraordinary situation, Brandeis eloquently explains why we must brave the discomforts and other potential risks that are posed by speech whose ideas we consider evil and even incendiary. So I urge all of you to read and reread this whole powerful opinion, but for now, here are just a couple excerpts. Those who won our independence believed that discussion affords adequate protection against the dissemination of noxious doctrine, and that the fitting remedy for evil counsels is good ones. Fear of serious injury cannot alone justify suppression of free speech. Men feared witches and burned women. Speech may not be suppressed unless it is shown that immediate serious violence is to be expected. The usual deterrents to prevent crime are education and punishment for violations, not abridgment of free speech. So this speech protective philosophy, so eloquently laid out by Justice Brandeis, was memorably summed up specifically in the campus context by a legendary university president, Clark Kerr of the University of California. In 1961, he made a comment that to me remains the best response to students who now demand safety from unpopular ideas. As he said, the university is not engaged in making ideas safe for students. It is engaged in making students safe for ideas. So now I'm going to, with those general points in mind, I'm going to overview 4 interrelated campus policies that present these general problems that I've been highlighting, and then I'll discuss one of them in more detail. They all result from the laudable, critically essential effort to ensure that campus sexual misconduct is treated seriously. For too long, too many campuses have ignored or even covered up sexual abuse. So it's a positive development that so many officials have recently made it a priority to right that wrong. But as often happens, after the pendulum swings too far in one direction, it then swings too far in the other direction. And of course, any campus failure to protect against or punish sexual abuse is a miscarriage of justice, but much less publicized, although starting recently there's been a lot more publicity. But still, I think most people are much less aware that there have been other miscarriages of justice the other way when campuses punish as rapists men who had consensual sex but are railroaded in kangaroo court-like proceedings. Also, campuses are punishing as sexual harassers students and professors who simply engage in expression that should be protected under free speech and academic freedom principles. These unjust standards and procedures have become endemic on our campuses due to pressure from the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, or OCR, ironic title in light of what it's been doing lately. It has warned campuses that they would be charged with gender discrimination and face losing all federal funds unless they took two steps. First, adopting an overly broad definition of sexual harassment, which endangers all expression with any sexual content. And second, adopting procedures for handling sexual misconduct claims that violate fundamental due process rights for accused abusers, while also failing to provide the serious punishment and protection that only the criminal justice system can afford. Now, almost all campuses are dependent on federal funding, so it's not surprising that universities are falling like dominoes, capitulating to OCR pressure. Also, in response to government pressure to crack down on sexual misconduct, universities have been adopting so-called affirmative consent policies. I'm sure you've all followed these, which presume that any sexual contact is non-consensual, in other words, an assault, a crime, unless it is preceded by explicit consent. This dramatically broadened concept of non-consensual sex is not only going to increase the situations in which students are unfairly branded as rapists, but it is going to reduce the stigma of rape. So again, an example of the worst of both worlds for liberty and for gender equality and justice. Now, small remaining time, I'm going to elaborate on this conclusion concerning one of these interrelated policies. Consistent with the theme of defending pornography, I've chosen the one that violates freedom of speech about sexual matters, namely the overly broad sexual harassment policies. So we go back to the starring role here played by the OCR, the so-called Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education, which has forced on campus a sweeping and distorted concept of illegal sexual harassment. And I'm going to quote it exactly. Sexual harassment is defined by the OCR as, quote, any unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature, close quote. There is no exception for speech. To the contrary, the OCR definition of sexual harassment is specially designed to deny the special status of speech under our Constitution, because that definition expressly extends to verbal conduct. And that's a perfect example of George Orwell's Newspeak, or I should say, new verbal conduct. Campuses are pressured to punish as harassment any expression with any sexual content that anyone might consider offensive. And that literally means anyone who is subjectively offended, no matter how unreasonably or irrationally. To the contrary, the OCR expressly rejected an objective standard, what we lawyers call the reasonable person standard. OCR stated that expression will be harassing even if it's not offensive to an objectively reasonable person of the same gender in the same situation. So given this sweeping concept of punishable harassment, universities have in fact been punishing students and faculty members for all manner of sexually themed expression, even when it has an important academic purpose, just because someone complains that they personally found the expression unwelcome or offensive. The most recent, most egregious, most publicized example is the prolonged sexual harassment investigation that Northwestern University conducted against respected film professor Laura Kipnis because of an essay she published in the respected Chronicle of Higher Education in February, in which ironically she was criticizing the distorted, exaggerated concept of sexual harassment that is prevalent on campus. So her attackers, far from undermining her point, to the contrary, dramatically demonstrated how sad but true it is. Now, to be sure, in the Kipnis situation and many others, punishment ended up not being meted out, or it was ultimately overturned in other situations, thanks to intervention by FIRE, the ACLU, other free speech advocates. But as the Supreme Court has recognized, free speech is a bridge. That's the key verb in the First Amendment. So free speech is a bridge, therefore violating the First Amendment whenever speech is subject to any substantial burden. And make no mistake about it, being accused of and subjected to a months-long investigation, accusation of sexual harassment certainly constitutes such a burden, no matter what the ultimate outcome is. So let me cite a few other examples. The Naval War College placed a professor on administrative leave and demanded that he apologize because during a lecture, by the way, this is the Naval War College, so think of the importance of this lecture there. It was a lecture on military ethics. He critically described Machiavelli's views about leadership by paraphrasing Machiavelli's comments about raping the goddess Fortuna. And again, I want to stress the professor criticized Machiavelli's views as being unethical, but as we've seen in other cases as well, the harassment zealots won't tolerate certain ideas or words being voiced at all in any context or for any purpose, not even for the purpose of critiquing them. So he was critiquing the rape metaphor, and he's out. Other examples, a sociology professor at Appalachian State University was suspended because she showed a documentary in class that critically examined the adult film industry. And she also dared to criticize the university's treatment of sexual assault allegations against student athletes. A professor of English and film studies at San Bernardino Valley College was punished for requiring his class to write essays defining pornography. Not defending pornography, just defining it. By the way, that's something the Supreme Court justices try to do, but not students in a class. The University of Denver suspended a tenured professor and found him guilty of sexual harassment for teaching about sexual topics in a graduate level course about the drug war in a course unit entitled Drugs and Sin in American Life, from Masturbation and Prostitution to Alcohol and Drugs. So I could go on and on. These are just all too typical samples. 2 decades ago, Defending Pornography criticized the doubly wrong concept of sexual harassment that gives rise to the incidents such as the one I've just listed, because they focus wrongly on sexual expression instead of focusing on sexist conduct. So the two flaws, sexual versus sexist, i.e. gender discriminatory, expression versus conduct. And that double distortion is bad for not only free speech, but also women's rights, because it embodies the archaic, infantilizing notion that women are inherently demeaned by any expression with any sexual content. Now I want to underscore the critical problem with punishing speech with sexual references that some audience members find offensive. And again, that's the essence of the OCR's concept of sexual harassment, which is now forcing colleges to adopt on penalty of losing federal funding. So again, let me quote them so you know I'm not distorting. The definition is any unwelcome conduct, including verbal conduct, i.e. speech, of a sexual nature. Now, in our wonderfully diverse society, we all have widely divergent ideas, values, tastes, especially about what sexual expression we find positive or negative. So for that reason, we shouldn't impose our subjective choices on anyone else any more than we would want them to oppose their choices on us. And I'm going to describe a cartoon that well captures this reality. It shows three people in an art museum. They're looking at a classic nude female torso. You know, you've seen them, a fragment of an ancient sculpture, minus the head, minus the limbs. Each viewer's reaction is shown in an air bubble, and the first one thinks, art. And the second one thinks, smut. And the third one thinks, an insult to amputees. We individuals even have different perspectives about whether any given expression has any sexual content at all. And that's captured by the old joke about the man who sees every ink blot his psychiatrist shows him as wildly erotic. And when his psychiatrist says to him, "You're obsessed with sex," the man says, "What do you mean I'm obsessed? You're the one that keeps showing me all these dirty pictures." An appropriately limited concept of illegal sexual harassment in the educational context was issued by the Supreme Court in 1999, namely not just anything that anyone considers unwelcome, as the OCR would have it, but rather only unwelcome conduct that is targeted, discriminatory, and here I'm quoting the Supreme Court, so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive, and that so undermines and detracts from the victim's educational experience that the victim's students are effectively denied equal access to an institution's resources and opportunities. Now that is an appropriately narrow definition that is consistent with both equality and free speech concerns, and therefore it's been endorsed by advocates of both, including the ACLU Women's Rights Project.